She said it softly, almost like a confession whispered in the dark, "I need space." Those words hung between us, heavy and fragile, trembling in the silence of the room. I could feel the weight of them pressing against my chest, each syllable a subtle fracture in what we once thought unbreakable. And yet, when I looked at her, the world seemed to shrink until it was just us, two souls orbiting the same magnetic pull, refusing to let go. Her eyes lingered on mine longer than necessary, a storm brewing beneath the surface. That one glance carried every emotion we'd both tried to hide: desire, fear, longing, and regret. Her hand brushed against mine, not quite holding, not quite letting go, a ghost of a touch that set fire to the nerves in my arm. The air between us vibrated with words unspoken, a tension that was almost unbearable in its intensity. I wanted to reach for her, to close the distance, but the challenge was in respecting the space she demanded, even as it tore at my patience. I watched her walk toward the window, the sunlight casting a halo around her silhouette, softening the curve of her shoulders, highlighting the subtle tremble in her posture. There was a fragility to her strength that made my chest tighten, a reminder that this was more than desire, this was something deeper, something raw and uncharted. And yet, even in her attempt to pull away, the pull between us was undeniable, like gravity itself conspiring to bring us together. I could feel my pulse matching the rhythm of hers, the quiet desperation of wanting to bridge the distance without shattering the fragile line she had drawn. Every instinct screamed to close the gap, to whisper the words she didn't dare say aloud. And in that fleeting moment, I made a decision that would change everything, an impulsive choice born from heartbeats and longing, not reason. I stepped closer, feeling the space between us shrink with every inch, and in the briefest of silences, our eyes locked once more. Time seemed to pause, caught between hesitation and inevitability. She didn't expect what I did next, and neither of us would ever forget the spark that ignited in that suspended heartbeat. He stepped closer, and the air seemed to thicken, charged with something neither of us could name. Every small movement felt amplified, the brush of his sleeve against mine, the faint rustle of his breath in the quiet room. I wanted to speak, to fill the silence with reassurance or confession, but the words lodged in my throat, heavy and uncertain. Instead, we let our eyes do the talking, lingering, searching, daring. "Are you sure?" I finally whispered, my voice trembling just slightly. He didn't answer, only tilted his head, the shadow of a smile playing on his lips. That smile, it was infuriatingly soft, tender, and full of mischief all at once. My chest tightened, a mix of anticipation and fear I couldn't untangle. A stray lock of hair fell across her forehead, and I reached up almost instinctively to brush it back. Our hands hovered for a heartbeat, too close to ignore, too aware of the line we shouldn't cross. She shivered, though I wasn't sure if it was from the touch or the electricity that had suddenly sparked between us. The hesitation in her eyes mirrored my own, wanting, resisting, craving, afraid. We moved slowly, circling each other like planets caught in the same orbit. Every glance carried weight, every inhale seemed synchronized. She laughed softly at something I hadn't even said, a sound that wrapped around me, warm and tempting. I wanted to lean in closer, to memorize the curve of her smile, the way her eyes sparkled with unsaid truths. And yet, there was a boundary, invisible but undeniable, holding us apart. The tension wasn't just desire, it was fear, pride, the echo of past mistakes neither of us had fully healed from. I wanted to erase it all with one impulsive gesture, but I also feared that crossing the line too soon might destroy what little stability we still had. So we lingered, suspended in that delicious, painful middle ground. The room seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us, our hearts beating in sync, our breaths mingling in the charged silence. Every accidental touch, every fleeting brush of skin, felt monumental. And in that stillness, I realized, nothing had ever felt so close, so urgent, and so utterly forbidden. Her eyes flickered toward mine, then away, as though even looking too long might break some fragile spell. I wanted to close the distance, to let the space between us vanish, but something held me back, an invisible wall I couldn't name. It wasn't fear of rejection. It wasn't doubt. It was the weight of everything we hadn't said, everything we were both carrying silently. I reached toward her again, slower this time, just enough for our fingers to graze. The briefest contact, and my pulse spiked. She shivered, but didn't pull away, not immediately. For a heartbeat, it was perfect, electric, a small confession in the language of touch. Then, almost reluctantly, she drew back, her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't decipher, longing? Fear? Regret? All at once, I thought. Why, is this so hard? I whispered, though I wasn't sure I even wanted an answer. She swallowed, her lips pressed into a thin line, and finally, she said nothing. Words had failed us before, they would fail us again. Instead, we lingered, suspended in that tension that felt heavier than air, heavier than time itself. Every movement she made was deliberate, yet delicate, a subtle shift of her weight, the way her hand brushed against the table as if to anchor herself, the way her gaze flitted across the room, avoiding mine, only to snap back when I dared glance her way. I saw the walls she had built around herself, layer upon layer, carefully constructed over years of disappointment and mistrust. I didn't know if I could dismantle them, but I wanted to try, every fiber of me aching to reach her. There was a hunger between us, undeniable and thick, but it wasn't just desire. It was history, fear, longing, and restraint all folded into one. I wanted to lean in, let the moment tip into something more, but I pulled back instead, careful not to destroy the fragile equilibrium. She mirrored me, caught between the same desire and restraint. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the world outside irrelevant. Every glance, every accidental brush, every unspoken word was amplified, magnified into something almost unbearable. And yet, neither of us crossed the line, both afraid, somehow, that giving in too fully would mean losing what little control we still had. The air was heavy, intimate, and electric, thick with a desire that was impossible to name, impossible to satisfy. The room had shrunk to nothing but us. Every sound outside, the faint hum of traffic, the whisper of wind through the trees, felt distant, like it belonged to another world. The space between us was electric, charged with a gravity neither of us could resist. I could feel it in the way her breath hitched when I moved closer, in the way her fingers twitched almost imperceptibly, searching for something she couldn't name. I can't stop thinking about you, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The words trembled, fragile, urgent, and finally, they landed. Her gaze widened, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything I had been longing to hear, and more. We moved in slow, measured increments, neither daring to close the distance completely, yet every millimeter felt monumental. My hand hovered near hers, and for a heartbeat, our fingers brushed, a fleeting, electric touch that sent a shiver through both of us. It wasn't a touch of passion, it was a touch of recognition, of connection, of longing made tangible. She swallowed, and I saw the vulnerability behind her eyes, the walls she had built, cracking just enough to let me in. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak, to confess something I could only guess at. But she didn't. Instead, she let silence take the lead, and in that quiet, the intensity of our shared longing became deafening. Every heartbeat was a drum in the room, every breath a reminder of how dangerously close we were to losing control. I leaned in slightly, enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, enough for our presence to collide in ways words could never describe. She didn't pull away, and yet she didn't let me in entirely either. It was a delicate balance, between desire and restraint, between confession and fear, between giving in and holding back. We stood there, suspended in a moment that felt both infinite and fragile. The air between us thrummed with emotion, hungry, restless, electric, and in that shared, wordless acknowledgement, I understood that everything had changed. Nothing had moved beyond a silent touch, nothing had crossed the line, yet the intimacy we just shared was so profound it could have broken us. The night wrapped around us like a velvet cloak, the city outside blurred by a gentle rain that tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the apartment was warm, filled with a quiet that made every small sound, a breath, a sigh, the brush of clothing, feel amplified. The tension that had held us taut for weeks finally unraveled, not with words, but with the slow, electric acknowledgement of everything we had been holding back. She leaned into me, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between us. Her breath melted into mine, soft and hesitant at first, then steadier, as if finally finding its rhythm in mine. Our eyes closed without command, drawn together by gravity, by the pull of shared longing. The brush of her hand against my arm sent sparks through me, not from the contact itself, but from the silent confession it carried. This was permission, this was trust, this was surrender. The rain outside traced streaks down the glass, and inside, our bodies spoke the words we couldn't find. Every subtle shift, every lean, every almost touch conveyed everything we had kept locked away. The warmth of her presence pressed against me, not urgent, not frenzied, but profoundly intimate, a slow, exquisite ache that filled every corner of the room. I felt her fingers trace along my shoulder, a path of gentle heat, a tender map of emotions we had both carried in solitude. Our breathing synced, slow, deep, full of the weight of months spent circling each other, of moments that had hovered on the brink of revelation. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in the apartment, every glance a reminder that desire could exist without urgency, intimacy without recklessness. She pulled back just slightly, her forehead resting against mine, and whispered my name in a voice trembling with relief and longing. The world outside ceased to matter, the rain, the night, the distant city lights, everything dissolved into this perfect, suspended moment. We moved together in quiet agreement, a rhythm dictated by the unspoken, a conversation without words. Skin against skin, yet not in a way that needed definition, the closeness itself was the confession. Time felt infinite, yet impossibly fleeting. We lingered there, suspended in warmth and quiet, letting the night carry us without expectation, without concern, only the raw, breathtaking connection of two people finally allowing themselves to feel. Every brush of her hand, every inhale, every heartbeat was poetry made flesh. And in that silence, in that surrender, everything we had denied each other became palpable. The room was alive with the intimacy of touch, of breath, of closeness. And for the first time, we both knew, nothing had to be spoken. We had finally let go. Morning light crept through the blinds in soft, golden strips, painting the room in quiet warmth. The rain had stopped, leaving the city damp and sparkling, but inside, the air felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. We lay side by side, close enough to feel each other's presence, yet distant in ways that neither words nor gestures could bridge. She stirred first, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, eyes unfocused, as if the night had left traces she hadn't fully processed. I wanted to speak, to fill the silence with certainty or reassurance, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, I traced the curve of her hand with my thumb, feeling the tremor of her fingers, and that alone said more than any confession could. Was it real? She whispered, voice tentative, barely audible. The question hung between us like mist, heavy, fragile, impossible to answer with certainty. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to promise her the world. But the truth was more complicated. It had been real, yes, electric, intimate, breathtaking, yet it had also been a night of letting go, of surrender, of testing the boundaries we'd circled for so long. Her gaze met mine, searching, vulnerable. There was no judgment, only curiosity, and the quiet weight of shared experience. I reached out, our hands brushing again, and we held that connection, fragile yet undeniable, letting the silence speak the words we couldn't say. Then, the doorbell rang. Startled, she pulled back slightly, eyes wide. I moved toward the door, heart hammering with an inexplicable mix of curiosity and dread. Through the peephole, a familiar figure stood, someone from our past, a truth we had both buried, a twist neither of us expected. The knock echoed in the apartment, and in that instant, the night's intimacy collided with the reality of life outside. Yet even in the tension, in the fear, and in the uncertainty, the bond between us had deepened. We had crossed a threshold together, shared a language of breath and touch and unspoken confession, and nothing could erase the quiet gravity that now held us together. The rain had long stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the early evening light. Inside, the apartment was calm, the quiet between us now gentle, familiar. We sat side by side on the sofa, shoulders touching, hands intertwined, not because it was urgent, but because it felt inevitable. Every heartbeat, every breath, had led to this small, perfect peace. She rested her head against my shoulder, and I pressed my lips to her forehead, a gesture so simple yet full of everything we had survived together, longing, restraint, fear, and finally, surrender. No words were necessary. Our silence spoke volumes, a language of trust and understanding. The tension that had defined our nights, our hesitations, had softened into warmth, a quiet acknowledgement that whatever had passed between us was meaningful and lasting. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the quiet epiphany we shared. But inside, time felt suspended. I could feel the steady rise and fall of her breath, the gentle warmth of her body pressed to mine, and it was enough to fill the emptiness we had once carried, enough to promise that we were no longer alone in our desire, in our hope, in our hearts. There was no grand declaration, no climactic moment, just the intimacy of presence, of shared vulnerability. Her fingers laced with mine, our foreheads brushing, our hearts choosing peace over fear. And in that moment, everything unspoken became spoken in the most profound way. Love need not roar, sometimes, it simply rests, quiet, certain, and breathtaking. We didn't need more.